Do you want me to send you the link for the Zoom?
Day and the moderately even weather so far. To introduce Dr. Stefan Fritsch, who is an associate professor of political science at Bowling State University. He's told me that since he was here 2 weeks ago, we didn't really need to say much more than that, and you can always ask questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me back again. I started feeling like a local resident here almost.
We like having you.
So today, the topic is AI and American security. But I almost feel like I have to say something or add something to what we talked about 2 weeks ago before I jumped in. It kind of stuck with me and I couldn't let it go, and I looked it up. If you think back 2 weeks ago, we had a brief discussion about the US support for NATO. And the question arose, well, how much does the US really sort of chip in? And so I had to look it up, because I was like, I don't know, I have to look it up, right? So the US has, in all 27 NATO countries, currently, the headcount of US military personnel is in total around 65,000 troops. But that includes everything from like a military attaché that represents the US within an embassy, right, to, well, the soldiers, right, on the military bases, or battle groups, right, that are within NATO, quite sort of joint or multinational battle groups, right? So those are the people in the field. My assumption is that a lot of that personnel is also sort of stationed on US military bases, particularly the Air Force has several bases throughout Europe. So that's one thing. And in terms of money, according to NATO itself, the US keeps in on an annual basis right now around $3.5 billion. That's about 15% of NATO's operating budget. Germany chips in the same amount, basically, and then it sort of goes down. The smaller the country, the smaller the contribution. So I think that puts it a little bit into perspective, right? 3.5 billion, considering that the annual military or defense budget of the US is currently around $800 billion. Right? So I felt kind of supported in my reply last time, right? That we're nowhere near, sort of astronomical amounts that are sometimes floating around on the internet. And any additional cost that the US would have to incur would come from, following up on its security guarantee. So that's primarily, obviously, a nuclear deterrence, primarily. So I just thought that had that on. It's stuck with me, right? Okay, so now fast forward, obviously it's a very different topic today, artificial intelligence and American security. And I'm basically the plan is to just briefly define what artificial intelligence actually is. Then very briefly, really briefly, do a historical overview, which is picking some major turning points. And then move into the military applications of AI, and then talk a little bit about the major issues, right, that we currently have in the field, right, the things that are debated. So I chose a definition from the European AI high-level expert group. So that was an expert group that was put together by the European Commission in 2018 to sort of start thinking about, okay, what is this thing, AI? Is there a need for regulation? How could we possibly approach this whole issue? And that's their definition. So Artificial intelligence refers to systems that display intelligent behavior by analyzing their environment and taking actions with some degree of autonomy to achieve specific goals. That's a very broad definition, obviously, right? It seems very abstract, but fundamentally, what the most important aspect here is that it's a human-made code, human-made software that in the long run, obviously, the goal is to emulate human thinking patterns, right? To emulate human intelligence, right? To discover, to infer from data, to draw conclusions, but also to act on the environment, right? So it's not just analysis, it's increasingly also sort of taking actions. And the goal is obviously to achieve these things increasingly in an autonomous way, right? So without necessarily human intervention. Right? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. So obviously this is a very long history. I'm right now teaching actually a class on the politics of AI this semester, which is very exciting because it's a pilot course for a new minor program that we're establishing at BGSU. This is not the shameless self-promotion part here. That was actually initiated by one of my colleagues at university, Jake Lee, who is the chair of the computer science department. So he sort of came up with this idea that we should maybe come up with some interdisciplinary program, right? That is not geared even at computer science majors, right? Computer science people do this all the time anyway in their department. But it's a new minor, that is geared at people who sort of want to pick up an additional certificate or degree, right? So non-experts basically, and the idea was that, okay, this is going to be a thing in the future, right? The students who graduate from BG will be exposed to this in one way or another in their professional lives. So maybe it's a good idea to offer them some training in that, and it's sort of multidisciplinary, so they take some intro computer or programming classes, but also a class on the ethics of AI. And then, depending on what their major is, we hope to, offer classes that either look at applications of AI in their respective fields or think about the implications of AI for society. So that's the end of the shameless self-promotion. But so I've been spending a lot of time with the history actually, and that's what I tried to hint at. It's very hard to put a definitive starting point at, when AI began, right? Well, are we talking about the first AI programs? Are we talking about ideas about artificial life? Then I can go back to antiquity and look at Greek mythology, right? God, the Titans breathing life into human beings, right? So I can go very far back. However, generally, people sort of put the starting point of modern AI as something that's like really happening at the time of World War II. Many of you probably have seen the movie The Imitation Game. Well, that's all about Alan Turing and the code breakers at Bletchley Park in Great Britain. So Alan Turing is widely considered one of the most brilliant mathematicians of the 20th century. He was basically the driving force, the genius behind breaking the Enigma code, right? That was all about breaking the Enigma code, which was a code that enabled the Nazis basically to send encrypted messages. They were able to do it actually, they broke the code, and so could basically read encrypted messages. That's how it started out. So that's what he's mostly known for, right? But because he was such a polymath and a mathematician, brilliant mathematician, he also tackled, just for fun, the famous Entscheidungsproblem or decision problem. So that was basically a fundamental dilemma or fundamental question in mathematics. And the question in nutshell is, well, can mathematics solve any mathematical problem? right? Is this possible, right? If we can solve any mathematical problem. And he basically found out or said, no, you can't, right? The way he did it, that means mathematics cannot explain every phenomenon, even within mathematics. The way he did it, though, and that's the crucial point, is that he made his argument with the help of an imagined machine, which he actually called the computer. It was the first time that we actually have the recorded use of the word computer. And in his mind, initially, it was a human being, right? But it was quickly expanded into a machine. We basically said the machine would, if there is a solution to the problem, the machine would eventually find it, or if not, the machine would continue working right indefinitely. So that's sort of, in that context, though, he also discussed the question of intelligence, like what is intelligence, right? And he came up with this test, which became known as the Turing test. Right? The Turing test basically is, I sort of have a visualization here. So you have a human tester that is physically separated from another human and the machine, right? Let's say a computer. And the tester communicates with both of these. And Turing said, the moment where the tester cannot differentiate if they're communicating with a human or a machine means that the machine has passed the Turing test. Right? You can obviously debate if that's, really the definition of intelligence. If they can basically trick somebody into believing they are human, or the machine can convince us that they're human. You all have used chatbots probably, right? Online. Where I do this all the time, not all the time, but when I have a technical problem on campus, you no longer call the Information Technology Service, ITS. You actually go online and start an online chat, right? And it always starts out with a chatbot. The chatbot says, hello, Stefan, what's your problem, right? So you start typing and you say, I've got a big problem. And then the chatbot will give you options, or I've learned my ways around this, right? I say something really difficult and that connects me automatically to a human person. So chatbot in this case failed, probably. But that's sort of an example for that, right? So anyway, the Turing test is actually, there are competitions every year, right? The most famous one is called the Loebner Prize. In this, people submit their programs, their algorithms, and see if they can trick human testers into believing that this is human, right? So far the results haven't been great. So that's the starting point. The term AI is sort of introduced into the debate in 1956. There's this sort of nowadays almost mythical conference, which was actually a very long summer workshop at Dartmouth University, where the geniuses of the time, the leading figures, came together to sort of have a massive brainstorming session and came up with that term. Now, the interesting thing that became really visible or very quickly was that AI isn't just computer scientists, right? It's not just software programmers. AI is really an umbrella term for a lot of people from different disciplines thinking about like artificial intelligence, right? So you've got mathematicians, you've got statistics, you've got psychology, neurosciences, of course, computer engineering, linguistics, and information communication studies. So it's really, it comes from insights have come and contributed to this large development from a lot of different sides. So just a year later, if I remember correctly, 1957 was Sputnik shock, right? So that triggered the US, into, not the US, but already doing financing sort of military technological developments, but the Sputnik shock sort of accelerated this and pushed the whole involvement to a different level. And just a year later, then DARPA was established. So that's the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. Still around, well funded. The magazine The Economist a couple of years ago called it the agency that created the modern world. Pretty much anything that we use right now in terms of mobile phones, the internet, right, all of that came out of DARPA-funded projects. So that means from that point on, there's a lot of government money available for scientists, right, to start, working on AI more systematically. And that's actually the case to this day. And it's also the major reason the US is still ahead, right, and actually so prominently placed in the global AI race, right? It's because there's a lot of money from, I don't want to say the military-industrial complex, but that sounds a little conspiratorial, right? But the military certainly does spend a lot of money on AI. So, very briefly, we've had a couple of boom and bust phases or periods in the development of AI, right? Stop it. So the first spring, so-called spring, goes roughly from the 1956 to 1972. You can think about this as, yeah, there's a lot of like first breakthroughs, right? People start developing programs in lab settings, right? Algorithms that can successfully play checkers, right? Things like that. They start thinking about programming languages, algorithms, and so on and so on. But in 1972, there are two damning reports coming out that say, listen, all these promises that were made, right, that by 1975 we'll have like fully autonomous, robots or something like that, and none of this happened. Right? So that begins the first AI winter, basically lasts throughout the 1970s. And then it picks up again towards the late 1970s, simply because there were some interests in development. Companies got into commercial, like private enterprises got into the game primarily because they were looking for ways to overcome shortages in terms of human experts, right? So, for example, mining companies, right, were very much interested in finding a technical solution to the lack of experts that could predict where the next deposits, like geologists, basically. Right? So there were some companies that successfully invested in what became known as expert systems, right? So these were basically computers that were able to imitate to some extent the thinking processes of experts, right? So you basically took a human expert, asked him, how do you reach your conclusions, right, about where something is in the ground, and you try to find a way or to develop an algorithm that can imitate that, right? So that was the phase of the expert system. There were applications in the healthcare industry, right, to assist doctors, right, with prescriptions, and so on and so on. And so on. We're also analyzing what the issues might be with the particular person, right? So anyway, so that's the ticket spring. It goes roughly through the 1980s, and then again the bust phase, right? It was like, okay, this is great, but where's the next big breakthrough? And the early 90s then, or the next sort of winter, and then it sort of just keeps going. Right? We haven't had a winter since then. Right? It's been a 30-year spring, more or less. And there's just some turning points, right? You probably are Deep Blue in 1997. So that was a very powerful IBM computer, actually the most powerful supercomputer actually. At the time, beat Garry Kasparov in chess, right? I mean, the world chess champion. Beat him, and then it just kept going. In 2011, another IBM computer, Watson, beats human Jeopardy champions. You can see all of this on YouTube actually, right? And 2017, Google's AlphaGo beats the reigning Go champion in the world. Go is also a game, a board game, where you have to place black and white stones that you have to. The goal is basically to eventually cover as much territory on the board as possible, right? And there is almost an infinite. There are more solutions to the game than there are allegedly stars in the universe. So I mean, that was a very big feat, right? So yeah, and it has a lot to do with sort of the change in the way that that people thought about, okay, how can we get these algorithms to become like smarter, right? But smart just means how do they become better in analyzing, right? Data, detecting patterns in the data, and making inferences and predictions, right?
What is LLM?
That's a large language model, right? So that's where the linguists come in, right? It's an interesting mix between linguistics, which is actually also just pattern detection, right, and prediction in languages. Deep learning and neural networks are sort of the state of the art these days, right? So you get algorithms to basically train themselves, right? You feed them incredibly large amounts of data and let the algorithms. There are different ways of doing this. You can either feed them data that is labeled, right? So you say, oh, here are 5 million images of a cat, right? Eventually the algorithm will be able to detect cat, right, on its own. But there's also the unsupervised learning where you basically tell the algorithm almost nothing, right? And the algorithm over time will figure out, okay, these are the defining features of the cat, right? And yeah, reach its own conclusions. Now with the unsupervised learning, the issue here is that you can't always, or the engineers, the software programmers oftentimes don't know how the program got to the conclusion, right? You can't trace it, right? So there's a little bit of a black box issue in that process. Yeah. Anyway, so it's all about, you need a couple of things for that. Or actually, let's talk about AI first. So there are 3 types of AI. Most of what we have today, or actually the only thing we have today, is what is called narrow AI or weak AI, right? So it's everything we have nowadays. Your recommendation algorithm on Netflix, right? Google, right? You Google something, and sometimes you see autocomplete. Well, Google will recommend. Oh, I think that's what you're looking for, right? The self-driving car, right? All of this, right, is fundamentally what we call weak AI. So it's very powerful computing, right, that has predictive capabilities, but fundamentally it's just amped up software. That's what we have these days. So even the fancy stuff, right, that you read about all the time, GPT, right, all these programs now that you can use, you can start playing around with it for free online, right? You just go to the GPT webpage and say, hey, write me whatever, you know. I mean, we start seeing this on campus a lot, right? Students are try to be as economical as possible with their efforts, right? Right? It's not all, obviously not all of them. It comes up every now and then. Allegedly, a lot of them use it now to take care of math, right? To find literature, to, yeah, well, and even write partial or whole papers, right? So obviously this can be very impressive, right? But at the end of the day, it's really just a lot of statistics, right, and prediction. The next step is what we call artificial general intelligence. So that's where we would push these capabilities to a point where it surpasses human abilities, right? Just becomes that much better, right? That much faster. And then the last stage is where we would have super AI that sort of I don't know if that's a good thing or a worse scenario, where the AI would develop self-consciousness, right? It would become aware of itself. It would be sentient, have feelings, expressed ideas, needs, interests, just like human beings. And that's called singularity. Right? That's floating around quite often. People talk or dream about the singularity. Right? So, but for now, we're just on stage 1 here. So what do we need? What are the components? Right? AI is not just an algorithm. You need massive amounts of data. Like fundamentally at this point, all the data that is available on this planet has been used up in those programs. Right? There's no more data. We're desperately they're constantly trying to find new data sources. Because almost everything is on the internet, right? That includes books, right? Even books, hard copies in the library. I mean, Google for 2 decades now, at least, has been digitizing books, right? They're working backwards. I mean, I can find books from the late 1700s on the internet now. So where do we get new data? I mean, we're creating constantly data, all of us, on a daily basis. The moment you turn your phone on, your mobile phone, the moment you go on the internet, the moment you swipe the credit card, the moment you get into the car, right? All of it. It's all data. And this is given away for free, basically. Right? The technical term for this is behavioral surplus. So all these companies like Google, Meta, Apple, right? But pretty much any company these days, right, collects massive amounts of data, and that data can be sold, right? There are companies that just sell and trade data, right? So this is a whole separate industry. You talk about something, you go on the internet, and suddenly you wonder, why do we see commercial or an advertisement for something that I was just like talking about, right? I have a suspicion that Alexa is really spying on us. Okay. Then we have the algorithms themselves, right? We need massive computing power, like massive, right? And obviously a lot of money. Really more. Moore's law is, so Gordon Moore was a chip designer, a chip engineer that was a co-founder of what became Intel. Right? Intel, the American chip manufacturing company. He formulated this law. It was basically an observation that so far has actually held up. That means roughly every 24 months, the calculating or computing power of microchips doubles. So far, he was right. Right? The prediction still, the model still holds. We don't know how much further we can push this because of the physical properties, of physical limitations of the materials we work with, right? But I think I mentioned it 2 weeks ago already. We are really in the nano scale at this point, right? So it's incredibly small. And that's the goal, right? You want to cram as much as possible, as many processes as possible on one computer chip, which costs a lot of money. Okay, now that's sort of so much for the technology, and I mean, we're already getting here probably too geeky, but the question now is, okay, why is this relevant for national security, right? Well, primarily because AI is what we call a dual-use technology, right? That means it's a technology that you can use for civilian purposes, right? It can develop a image recognition program that helps a doctor determine, oh, that patient has cancer, right? And that image recognition is now, in most cases, better than the actual human. Or I can use the algorithm for military purposes. right? I can weaponize AI. We have many examples for these types of dual-use technologies. I can build a nuclear power plant to generate electricity, or I can enrich it and put it in a warhead, right? And put it on an intercontinental ballistic missile. I can use satellites to observe weather patterns, right? I could put weapons on a satellite, right? Turn it into weapons platform. Computers, AI, all of this, right? All dual use. So that's why this fundamentally is important, right, to national security. How does the military already use AI? Right? Well, obviously, for any analytical purposes, like data analysis, pattern recognition, right? You have, for example, drones, right, that have AI algorithms that analyze the video feed of the drone, right, and tries to determine if that person running around on the ground there is maybe either a terrorist, right, or insurgent or a civilian. Right? Or the Iranians, or what are the Iranians doing there in terms of why are they constructing something in the middle of the desert, right? Or what's going on under that mountain, right? Is that so for these types of things? That obviously feeds also into any decision-making process, right? Human decision makers, like military decision makers, right, could rely on AI-enhanced analytics. We obviously use it for digital warfare at this point, right? You have cyber attacks, right? And AI programs can help you detect when a cyber attack is actually happening. I can also do information warfare, right? I mean, we've seen this in the Russia-Ukraine war, right? It's a wonderful example for that, right? Deep fakes and that kind of stuff. Right. So that sort of bleeds into things like propaganda, right? Just manipulating basically information. And we're also thinking about combining AI with nuclear arms, right? So the point and sort of the overall pressure here is to accelerate decision-making processes, right? Shorten reaction times, improve analytics, and probably also shorten times and decision-making when it comes to actually applying armed force, right? When does the drone strike, right? Do I let a human continue to make that final call, or do I increase sort of incrementally the autonomous elements? That's a big discussion, right? How can I make sure that if I have a fully autonomously operating drone that even makes a decision to engage, how can I make sure that the algorithm is aware that there's a difference between the civilian and the competent, right? For example, who is responsible for making that last decision? I can't sue an algorithm if it turns out to be the wrong decision, and you just blew some civilians, that happen to be at a wedding, to smithereens. Like, who is at fault here, right? Is it the algorithm? Is it the software programmer? Is it the military decision maker? Right? These are sort of the dilemmas here. So, in a nutshell, there's like with every previous technology that we have applied for military purposes, there are opportunities and there are risks. Right? And sometimes, to quote Donald Rumsfeld, we don't even know what we don't know at this point. Right? Technology assessment is a guessing game. Right? Try to figure out what could happen. Right? So, countries are in the game. That's no doubt, right? A lot of countries are investing in military AI capabilities. That map basically shows you the top 10 at this point in terms of the Stanford Center for Human-Centered AI comes out with what they call an AI vibrancy tool. So they take 42 indicators, right? That could be the number of scientific publications that deal with AI, the number of patents and investments, for example, and how much money goes into this, right? And they take 42 of those indicators and aggregate them into that tool, and then they start ranking countries. Right? So obviously the United States is up there, is actually the leader in all of this. China, of course, trying to catch up, and so on and so on. Right? But there are huge discrepancies, right? I mean, when we say the US is a leader, then by a lot at this point. Okay. So here we have found a map. Those are color-coded in blue countries that have already released, so to speak, a national strategy on AI. Right? So that's okay, this is the thing, we have to get in the game, we need this, we want this, here's what we have to do in the future. In orange, you have countries that have not yet come out with such a national strategy. And then in gray, there are a couple of gray ones where they are being developed as we speak. So it's not really a big surprise, right? I mean, you could correlate this probably with socioeconomic development, right? The more advanced the society, the more the wealthier, right? The more technologically capable, right? The more likely you are to have a national strategy already. So it's good to see the global distribution. Okay, now key policy debates. Well, there's actually a bunch of problems, right? A bunch of issues. Generally, always, of course, the safety of AI programs, right? The algorithms, how effective they are. You have probably heard about just making sure that the system can't be corrupted, right? That's a big issue with AI because you can corrupt, for example, the data, right? If the data on which the algorithm is already trained is corrupted, and right now, and a lot of that happens sort of by accident, right? Because we call it algorithmic bias, right? So example would be credit loan decisions, right, for mortgage, and then based on the zip code, for example, you could say, oh, you know, that zip code are more sort of minorities living there, right? So they are considered riskier for the lender. So we'll deny their claims, right? Or we'll make them pay significantly higher interest rates, like things like that. There have been a lot of cases in the US where police departments started using facial recognition, right? And then because the programs were primarily trained on white people, headshots of white people, they were really bad in detecting or correctly identifying, for example, black people, right? So these are examples for algorithmic bias. So that's why the data is so relevant here, right? The integrity of the data. A big thing.
And in medicine too.
Yes. I mean, there's a lot happening already, sort of behind the background, right? That we are not aware of on a daily basis. That's actually the fact that so much of this works and functions and does its thing in the background. We call this in science and technology studies the black boxing of technology, right? We don't ask anymore, right, what it's actually doing, right? We just deal with the outputs, right? So data privacy is an issue in that context, right? We give it all away, as I said before, right? Sometimes unbeknownst to us, right? Because whoever reads the licensing agreement, right? You just click on the button and say, yes, I agree. But you've just signed away everything, right? I don't know if anybody in here had this experience, but a while ago, I think it was sometime in the fall, there was a huge outcry over the discovery that car companies, car manufacturers had, because there's so much digital stuff involved now, and they collect all this data. And when people sort of bought the cars, they signed away the rights to that information, and the car companies sold it over to trading companies, and those trading companies sent it to insurance companies. And so the insurance companies would see exactly how people would drive, right? Acceleration, braking, whatnot, right? And based on that, they would adjust the insurance rates, right? But most people weren't aware that they actually sign, you sign 1 million documents when you buy the car, right? Just all want to get out of there, right? And there you go, right? Next thing you know is your insurance rate triples, right? Because allegedly you are considered a risky driver, right? So that's an example for data privacy. Now, data privacy for all of these large companies is anathema, because they want all the data, right? That's how they make money. But they also need it for the AI, right? So thinking about patient data, right? All of this has huge implications for privacy. In some countries, it's a bigger issue than in other countries. I feel like in the US, it's not really a big issue, right? People generally have very little concern for their privacy. But it is an issue. The problem of the fourth point here, the issue is how humans, we often don't understand how algorithms actually reach their conclusions, right? Make their decisions. So there's a lot of debate on how can you make this more transparent. You have to be able to explain where the data came from, what you did with the data, how the algorithm actually processes and analyzes the data, and how this results in certain outcomes. But again, this is complex, because as we said before, in a lot of algorithms now, those deep learning algorithms, even the engineers don't understand what's happening, right, in the black books. But technically, we have to reopen their black books and make everything explainable. At least explain to consumers, for example, or citizens, that yes, now you're actually acting with a chatbot, right? Or when you we call a hotline nowadays, you have the incredible pleasure of first dealing with an AI program, right? That determines if you really need a human being. Right? And everybody's yelling, agent, 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 right? Give me human. No, thank you. I don't need the phone creature. Connect me with person. Right? So it's about transparency, right? But again, a lot of players don't want transparency because it's complicated, right? Or it's actually runs contrary to what they're trying to do, which is black boxing the whole thing. And it's then telling us to shine into the big product. And then it's about the biggest issue probably are those what we call high-risk AI applications. So you've heard this so far mostly coming out of China, right? The social scoring. So China is obviously a very autocratic surveillance-based society. In China, the Chinese government basically tracks people 24/7, right? With surveillance cameras everywhere, depending on, and so they collect a lot of data, right? Based on that, if you're showing some devious behavior, right, they can lower your social credit score. That means you might be denied services, you might not be able to use public transportation, right? So I mean, it's like Orwell's 1984 on steroids. Obviously, that's stuff that, at least in the Western world, in democratic societies, we should be very wary of. That includes also, as I said before, like facial recognition and that kind of stuff, right? So all of these are generally high-risk applications. So, and those are ongoing debates, right? I mean, this is happening now as we speak. In the US, Well, the article in the booklet mentions a couple of initiatives. Obviously, we don't have the time to go into details, but the Biden administration released the blueprint, right, for an AI Bill of Rights. It was, of course, citizen and consumer oriented, right, and tried to sort of provide guidelines for these issues that are listed on the previous slide, right? But again, this is a blueprint, right? I mean, I can sit down and come up with a blueprint, right? But it's like writing a letter to Santa Claus. Right? So it's now binding, right? It's like, okay, here companies, here Silicon Valley, that's what we would like you to do, ideally, right? The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, came out with recommendations on an ethical AI in 2021. But again, recommendations, it's already in the title of the document, right? It's non-binding, right? It's like, here's a best practice manual. Same thing for the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, right? Did that in 2019. Also, all non-binding, right? The only act we have so far that's tried to lead is legally binding and just went into force last summer in August, I think, is the European Union's AI Act. Right? I think I brought this up last year, actually. We were already talking about AI. And I said, I've read it, obviously, I'm writing a book on these efforts in the European Union. It's a 300-page document that is chock full with technical lingo. I mean, it makes your brain hurt. And I'm a masochist, but that was even hard for me to digest. That's really, and we don't even know if it's gonna work. It's there are some parts that are already outdated because the technology moves so fast that, you know, yeah. So, and what interests me in particular is, yeah, you can regulate, and surely Europeans love to regulate stuff. Right? They're really good at that. But there's a lot of concern that you can basically regulate something to death, right? And what's that gonna do for you trying to catch up with the big players, right, in terms of innovation, right? So, which is, you know, a much bigger issue, right, for the Europeans, because we are behind, right? So, yeah. There's an intrinsic tension in there, right? Between I want to make it safe, I want to make this transparent, you know, and so on. And at the same time, I want to ban certain technologies outright. But even the EU has made a big exception in the AI Act that you can even play around with the super risky stuff as long as you do this in your lab, right? Your laboratory. You can try all kinds of stuff. It's at the moment when you start thinking about commercializing something and releasing it to the public, then suddenly it's like, no, now you got to make everything transparent. You got to tell us exactly how you collected the data, how the algorithm works, and make this all traceable. Right? I mean, that's administrative, bureaucratic nightmare, red tape. Right? And the scientists say, all I want is some money, you know, to sort of do my thing. Right? I don't have time for this. Right? So there's a lot of those issues right now, even with these with the case of the European Union, right? And I'm really interested in my own project. What do the scientists and engineers actually think? I mean, do they just laugh at this and sort of like, yeah, whatever, you know? So we'll see. I can tell you more maybe in a year, right?
And then it'll be obsolete.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, that's how the European Parliament justifies, well, now I'm being very sarcastic, right? But then we need another act, 2.0. So, the US approach briefly, and then, sorry, I've already taken up so much time. So obviously, we've talked about some of this, I think already even last time, right? Export controls, right? The Chips and Science Act that was signed implemented by the Biden administration. The most prominent part was we basically banned the export of the most advanced computer chips to China. Right? You probably, well, and this is the pros and cons for that, right? Obviously, you can slow down Chinese advances in AI, by not giving them the most powerful chips, but as you have read the last 2 weeks, everybody has been freaked out because they just released, this little startup released its own version of the most advanced large language model, and it's almost as good as the most advanced stuff that OpenAI has come up with in the US, right? So, and the Chinese did this. So the models, the algorithm is basically as good as allegedly what we have here in the US, made by the largest players. But they did it with a fraction of the computer chips that you normally use, and with significantly less money. So that is the Chinese calling is the right now. Secretary General Communist Party. So it's a nice example where you try to basically exclude somebody from doing something, or you you're pushing them in the corner and they sort of double down, figure it out on their own. Right? Now I have somebody, and then of course everybody was like, "Oh my God, NVIDIA, you know, our darling on Wall Street now. What's going to happen to NVIDIA?" Now I have a friend, an acquaintance at NVIDIA that works on computer chips, and I talked to him actually this week. And I said, "Hey guys, what's going on? You know, is everybody like freaking out in the Silicon Valley?" And he's like, "We looked at that. And unfortunately, the media, journalists, something really don't do their work, don't do their research." He said, "Yes, it is very good. It's very impressive what they came up with. And it uses fewer chips, that's true, but it wasn't that much cheaper, right? They estimate it was 30% cheaper, right, than what it would cost Google, right, or Meta to come up with." And he said that was a PR stunt, right? Because they didn't include all the upfront costs, right, for training getting the data, and so that's not the first version of this algorithm, right? So he said they excluded all of this, and then of course it looks great on paper, right? And he said it was a remarkable achievement, but that's not a reason to freak out, right? And he said, you know, now that they released all the data, right? They made it open. They made it, which is something that most US companies at this point don't do anymore, right? It's all proprietary and tightly protected, right? The Chinese just threw it out there and said, "Yeah, go and check it out," right? The other thought he had was, why is this bad for NVIDIA, right? I mean, it's not gonna jeopardize our business, right? It could potentially actually be even great for our business, because that means the entry barrier to doing that kind of stuff has just been lowered dramatically. That means more companies could actually get in the ring, and we could sell a lot more computer chips. So much for the export controls, right? There is a lot of that going on right now. The question is, will this be effective in the long run? What is definitely necessary is to increase AI literacy, right? People have to become more aware of what's happening, right? And how this sort of impacts our lives. It's also with our students. I mean, I guess that was part of the motivation behind this minor program, right? Just have to expose people to the pros and cons, right? The opportunities and the pitfalls. And that includes also decision makers in the government, right? It's not just us, right? Civilians, so to speak, citizens. More focus on the ethics. Well, that's an ongoing debate, right? I'm not sure that the new administration is that much concerned about the ethics of AI. I'm not trying to be, lean one way or the other. I just don't see that when you look at who has the presidency right now, right? It's It's a lot of these AI leaders. So yeah, and then lastly, again, there's a lot of this is a global thing, right? This is not just the US thing. This is a global challenge, and so the natural gut instinct would say, okay, that if it's a global thing, you should probably work on this like the global level, right? That means you bring the countries together. I don't see a lot of things happening right now that, or in the foreseeable future, that would reflect that kind of approach, right? So instead, we'll see sort of what we might call an AI arms race, right? That sort of happens and unfolds in sort of a more uncontrolled fashion. So, or maybe we'll see regional efforts. I mean, but again, with how much of an impact can the EU have as a regulator at the global level when, you know, they are struggling already to maybe implement it within Europe effectively. Maybe we'll see some what we call policy diffusion, right? I think in California, the governor just signed some legislation that took a lot of inspiration in terms of like transparency, right? And explainability of AI. That took, I think, a lot of inspiration from the AI Act, right? But we'll see how all of this pans out. We're really early in the game.
European Union AI.
Yes, I mean, you know, just as an inspiration, right? But we'll see. So well, definitely gonna stay interested. That's all I can say. And I think that's it. That was it. Yeah, that was it. Sorry, this was very long, but thank you for being so attentive. Like, why don't you all enroll at BG?
Your course is free to seniors.
Yeah, you should come anytime. Open the door.
All right, we'll do questions. Just a reminder, please be mindful of others. Like, try and stick to one question so that way everybody can get a chance to ask their question. Just raise your hand when you have a question, and then I have a microphone, so I will go by the way I see.
In 1970, there was a movie called Colossus, starring Eric Braeden, famous for being Victor Newman on Young and Restless. And this computer, Colossus, was what you would call a super AI. It was sentient. And it decided that it just took over both the United States and the Soviet military capabilities and dismantled both countries' nuclear weapons because the computer decided that the people were too immature to be able to handle such dangerous weapons. And
Colossus, it's called?
Colossus, yeah, 1970. And the computer decided that humans could not be trusted with nuclear weapons. And it was a pretty good movie. It was.
I'm still gonna watch it tonight.
In 1970, they were already envisioning what you have just described as super AI. It was sentient, self-aware.
Like it's been AI has been on the fringe for so long, right? Really, if you look at the history of AI, I mean, it's only in the last maybe 10 years that it's come sort of has become a sort of a public topic, right? I mean, it used to be something for the geeks, for the lab rats, you know, for the engineers tucked away somewhere, you know, in basements and
Well, good morning, Doc. First, I'd like to thank you yet again for joining us here and risking, you know, you already know. But my question is this, last week I had a chance to attend a webinar for business owners. And one of the things that they were discussing was how Google is on the trajectory to be outpaced by Bing as far as like AI technology in relations to businesses and things like that. Is this something that you've seen in your research? Should we kind of like stick with Google or like what do you think? Thanks.
me, they're all the same. Honestly, it's really hard to keep up with all of this, right? Because it just happens so fast. And I want to say Google has maybe, well, yes, I would call it, well, I have a colleague at the European University Institute in Florence. He's a competition lawyer, and he wrote a book that's called Monopolies, right? So it's which is somewhere between sort of a monopoly and an oligopoly, right? So it basically says that a lot of these big players, right, Amazon, Google, Meta, about 10, 12 total, often develop sort of, they dominate one particular market clearly, right? I mean, Amazon is kind of like a sales platform, right? But then they also dabble in adjacent fields. Like, I mean, Amazon makes probably not much less money now with cloud services, right? Cloud. And so you get this kind of weird, and they're actually fiercely competing with each other, right? So it's really hard to say if this is an oligopoly or is this monopolistic, because they always have to make sure, like they always have to keep an eye on these other 11 companies, right, and see what they're doing. So there's a lot of, usually a company that is in a monopoly situation stops investing, right, because they've covered so much of the market that they get lazy, right? And we don't really see that right now in AI and in these other areas, because money just pour billions and billions and billions of dollars into these efforts. I guess that's why the Chinese revelation 2 weeks ago was sort of a wake-up call that no, there's actually still space for small companies to get in and come up with something that is really, it's gonna change sort of the game, right? Mix it up. But in terms of your particular question, maybe they are, I don't know, right? I don't know the specifics of, you said Bing, right? So Bing is Microsoft, right? Correct. Maybe they found a new niche, right? Or maybe they think they have an advantage here now over Google, right? Or they have identified maybe smaller, mid-sized businesses, right, as a potential market.
You know, one of the things that was mentioned was, that there was a microphone there.
Sorry, or?
It was in relation to searches.
Okay.
Yeah, and they would notice that real businesses will be pushed further and further down.
Oh.
You know, they,
So it's about search results and the rankings of.
yeah, yeah.
Well, that's generally a problem, right? With because that can be altered, right? It's I don't know if you can pay your way up, but I think there are now companies that have. I mean, there are the consulting services that help you to move up in the searches, right? I mean, there are a million strategies to. I mean, not a million, but there are strategies to sort of beat the algorithm, right, and try to make your way on the top, right, the search results.
Okay. Well, thank you, guys.
There's a lot of manipulation going on in that regard.
Back to your opening remarks, how many troops does the United States have in NATO?
65,000 now, not in Europe.
Oh, in Europe.
In Europe.
Because we, even with our recruiting difficulties, we still have more than 1 million people in the military. And every unit in the military has NATO as either its primary mission or its secondary mission. So you probably shouldn't use, I forget, don't use that 65,000 numbers, not even close.
Right, but this is on the rotating. I mean, that's literally the people that are right now in Europe.
Yeah, those are the guys that are stationed in Europe, but you know,
That's a rotation.
I went in Europe a couple times, right, and I got 2 decorations from the old matter of fact. And I was never stationed, right, I was never in NATO when my unit fought for,
Oh, okay.
okay, all right, and we were, I'm sure we were part of the 65, well, I know we were part of the 5,000. Most of those troops are either airborne, you mentioned, or are support troops. Support troops are supposed to take care of the the divisions that come over when the Russians go into Poland.
Okay,
And we've got over 1 million people in NATO.
right,
Good talk, by the way.
thank you. I'm always happy to get this because I mean, you know, Austria is neutral, right? We're not, unfortunately, not part of that.
They were my favorite groups to work with.
Really?
I like the.
Good, I'll relay that back.
That's a good question. Does the big data that reach to history, AI, differ significantly from, say, China? In that, our society is based on private individuals and have those and these systems, the opposite is and
Right.
and the second question is, if you see it supporting AI, the world status, and all the citizens united, corporations and consider it individual.
Well, so I'll start out with the first, with the second one. So we would have to start that debate once we reach the singularity. Right? So once we would have a self-conscious AI, right? Because if it's sentient, it has needs and ideas and opinions and all of that. At that point, we would have to start. I mean, we're already having the philosophical debates, right? But yeah, then you would have to think about like, where's the difference from this? Right? I mean, there's only a physical difference in that we are biological and the AI or the robot would be not, right? But even those things are the boundaries are sort of starting to blur. I mean, I read some philosophical philosophers of technology right now that think along these lines, right? When the stuff gets smaller and smaller, and in maybe 5-10 years, we'll have nanobots that we can inject into our bodies, right? Do all kinds of stuff in the medical sense, right? These are hard questions. Right? But we're not there yet. We're still so far out, mostly dumb or weak AI. Right? But that's definitely on the horizon. Now, with regard to the first question, I didn't catch if you were mainly thinking about data or sort of more the society AI kind of relationship. Was it that? So that's a really interesting one. I actually just had the discussion with the students the other day. Quite often, it's technologies can function in either system, right? A democratic system or an autocratic system, right? I mean, think about. Let's think about like industrial manufacturing, right? Large plants, mass production, let's say steel or cars. In the Western world, like under capitalism, right? Once you had these super large sort of industrial systems that required a lot of coordination, right? Because in order for steel to be made, you need railroads, you need the raw materials to come in on time, you have to get the stuff out of the plant and then get distributed. The business history says that that's the moment sort of in the 19th century when the modern corporation was invented, right? Many divisions, and it was all about coordinating all of these complex processes as effectively as possible. So that's under capitalism. Right, modern corporation. In the Soviet Union, they also made steel, right? And it wasn't a modern corporation, it was a state-owned company. Was it as effective? Maybe no, not quite as effective, right? But fundamentally, the operating logic was the same, right? You need to centrally, so both of them have to control these things centrally, right, to make it work. So I think what I'm trying to say is, it might be different in some aspects, right? But if you really look at the bigger picture, it was done in both types of societies, right? So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer. Again, it brings me back to the consequences, right? I mean, you can make AI good and ethical and transparent, right? Or you do the opposite. Right. I hope so, right? And then I hope we keep those differences, right? I don't want a social scoring system in the US, right? I would not like to see like universal surveillance, through cameras, right? I would love for there to be severe restrictions on facial recognition, right? And that kind of stuff. So yes, in that regard, the Chinese can just do whatever they want. The Communist Party can do whatever it wants, right? At this point. But that's exactly the outcome we don't want. Right? That's, for example, the AI basically says we don't want these kinds of technologies because we don't want Chinese conditions, right? Chinese situation. But that's deliberate decision, right? To say we are not going to use it. Or if, then only under the conditions. Right? Imminent danger, or there's there's a warrant or whatever, right? So that we can actually use that stuff. But that's regulation. It's a question of regulation. Yes, please. Oh, sorry.
I was reading about the shortcomings of AI. In this particular study, they pointed to what they said was the algorithm's propensity to, quote, hallucinate. What is meant by that? How do we understand that? And what kind of risk is that?
So the hallucinating algorithms, that goes back to, or hints back, it's connected to not understanding what the algorithm actually does, right? It basically makes stuff up. Right, so that in that sense, hallucinating algorithm is a faulty algorithm, right? You see that, for example, with student writes a paper, and that to some extent has been remedied because a lot of these large algorithms now, these models are connected to the internet, right? So they can actually check against the internet. The information is available on the internet, but the hallucinations came from having incomplete data, right? And then the algorithm just made stuff up, for example, sources, right? Or literature, right? So that's what is meant with hallucination. Right? And again, the engineers don't understand where it went wrong, right? So that's the problem. They don't understand, right? They can't pinpoint why the hallucinating happens, right? And that was particularly in those closed. There was a particular issue as long as, for example, ChatGPT was not connected to the internet. That means it had a lot of data, but it had no real-time ability to basically go out on the internet and do the same thing that we do, right? We start looking around for information, right? Or we try to confirm something.
This might be a whole other subject, but in the 50s, when they kind of eliminated or sold AI, included mathematics and so on, they didn't include ethics. Could you kind of trace the history of ethics in regard to AI?
Yes. Well, it sounded way surer than I am. Sorry. Sorry, I take a step back. It started very. It's a really interesting question that I have been sort of trying to figure out for myself within that larger research project. And I can only speak more confidently for the European context, right? Because I've been trying to trace sort of how AI became a thing in Europe. And you have, it's sort of something that wasn't really an issue for so long because it was such a fringe thing, right? It was really, it was something people explored, people worked on it, obviously, but there were very few ethical concerns until sort of the late 1980s, when they started thinking about using algorithms like in the medical field, right? So I found sources in the historical archive of the European Union where the European Parliament had, so the Commission made proposals to do a research project, like image pattern recognition in the medical field, right? Or with the goal of improving, the ability of doctors to identify cancer, for example. And there I found sort of indications that parliamentarians were very concerned with patient privacy, right? Like how can we make sure that the data, right, remains sort of private and confidential, right? And it's not just sort of distributed out there into the wide world, right? So I think that those were the first sort of moments where people have had these kinds of concerns, right? I also found it a little bit there's some here and there, some publications by privacy lawyers in the late 80s, right? That were generally, there wasn't not so much AI related, but more generally concerned with sort of digital technologies, right? And how that would impact privacy. I would also argue that the fact that we now, over the last 10, 15 years, are talking about this much more is actually an indicator that the technology itself has become more pervasive, right? I mean, it's just more now, it's applied, right? People run into problems, we discover all kinds of issues, right? Once this is all abstract and in the future, and we mostly think about the potential, right, of certain technology, you often see that the potential pitfalls and the ethical dilemmas are downplayed, right? Or sometimes also just ignored, right? Because we're just so, yeah, this is awesome, this is the future, and only later then, as a result of being confronted with negative side effects, right? That's when you start thinking like, oh wait, there's actually a problem here. So we call this in science and technology studies that the unintended consequences. Right? And that's usually when the ethical debates come in. Right? So yeah, so it's actually on the back side basically, right? Rather than on upfront. I don't know if that was a satisfactory answer. But it is, I mean, it is one of the core issues, right? The ethical concerns. Because I mean, for me, this is sort of really the conundrum here, right? How do you make AI ethical, right? And when there's a tension, right? You want the innovation, right? And you're in this global competition, because if you don't do it, somebody else will do it, right? And then on the other hand, you want that to be safe and transparent, right? Like how do you square that circle? Again? Well, yeah. Like, you also want to understand how it comes. I mean, I don't know. I think we should make the decision, not the AI. Yeah. These are ongoing debates, and I think they're only going to intensify.
I guess Apple has abandoned its iCard. This is about philosophies going ahead. Apple has abandoned its iCard and has a strategy of partnering now with other companies who are buying promising AI companies. While other companies like Amazon and others, it's more they're going it alone, and it's like the Wild West with some successes and many failures. For instance, Alexa, which we have in our house, is more stupid than it used to be because Amazon is not putting any money in it. And it's better to go to ChatGPT or PI or something like that. So which philosophy would be best for the United States to pursue, partnering with companies that look promising, or just trying to go it alone and see what sticks and what works?
Well,
You mentioned the laziness of monopoly.
yeah, but in that field, I think I also said we don't see it, right? The companies. I would say that many of these players gobble up startups, right? The whole point of, I mean, why do companies sort of buy startups? Either because they have something really good going on, right? And they're like, I'm better getting my hands on this, right? Before they become any bigger, right? Or somebody else picks them up, right? So actually, I shouldn't say that's the main reason, right? Or you limit by that you eliminate the competition. Right? So, but they all have done this in the past. Right? I couldn't tell you, you know more than me at this point about who is ahead and gobbling up these startups, but it's a widely applied strategy. And it's not specific to just AI. It happens all the time. It's also a deliberate strategy, right? I mean, it's cheaper, right? And then not just employ these people, right? That's you buy yourself know-how.
Is one of the shortcomings of AI the fact that at some point there's got to be human intervention. You gather all this data, you assemble all of this data, but somebody has to tell it how it's going to rate, interpret, and apply that data that has been collected. Is that the shortcoming?
Well, so one of the concerns is in the field right now that like human AI interaction, right? Sometimes it's also the human that is actually the problem, right? The human is the weak spot. And the AI actually does a better job. So I think we'll see a lot more like thinking and trying to figure out how humans and AI can interact effectively, right? The term that sort of floats around in that regard is like AI enhanced whatever, you know. So the idea is that the AI supports the human, right, in whatever the task is. Right? And that's actually also sort of the debate in economics, like labor economics, right? I mean, there's the fear that AI is going to replace, I don't know, X million jobs, right? And we don't know yet. We've had these fears always. I mean, the same was said about the internet. Right? The internet was going to kill millions of jobs. Well, it might kill certain types of jobs, but it also creates whole new categories that we haven't even thought about yet. And some things are completely sort of immune to AI, right? Because it's so expensive. Like the gardener, the lawn service, right? Well, unless you have a Roomba, right? So the equivalent, doing your lawn, mowing your lawn, but cleaning services, for example, that's an example I've come across a lot, right? Cleaning services are not going to go away because it's as badly paid as it is, right? It's for any robot super hard to do, right? Because it's really hard to get into those like last little spaces, right? So that's something that's not gonna go away, right? The paint shop, the painter, the plumber, right? All of these kinds of things are for sure not going to disappear. It's just too complex for any robot or AI to handle. Others, anything that can be sort of automated, right? There's fear that there are a lot of like mid-level administrative jobs in businesses, or the paralegal, right? Is threatened. We'll see. We don't know yet. It's certainly a big debate.
Your last comment about the predictions, it makes me smile. I remember in 1950, predicted that by 2000, we push a button and our house would be clean. But
It's a lovely thought.
then, and as far as the AI, physicists wrote a program in the 1970s. Why? Yeah. We made it. We won't need the counselors anymore. Because I made it, and I did computer programming for fun in the 1980s, so I know a little bit about it. To the Richard D. Wolf, who reads a couple of other languages, reads foreign languages, foreign newspapers every day. And he's described the Chinese system as socialism with a Chinese flair or something like that. That was a mixture that seems to work real well and brought, many people out of poverty in just a few decades. We ought to look at their system, you will be that. What's the sort of like right, if you don't call it socialism because they made that a dirty word in the 1950s and people were all over the yeah, some of them. But I think we ought to look at it. But I read a little bit about what this Chinese company did with the CPC, and they hired just a lot of people, and they didn't hire people who discovered things before were good. They said, oh, they're interested in keeping their stuff, but they kept people on even if they didn't find any results for a year or so. I mean, they're there over the long haul. It would be to be you're fired if you didn't do well this week.
Yes.
I don't question, but I don't think anybody would predict. Oh, another comment as far as the surveillance goes. I think we need to ask Snowden about the surveillance.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was really told us a lot, right? But this was even long before AI became a thing, right? I mean, surveillance, that was sort of hinted at that earlier, right? I mean, we sort of emanate, so to speak, a lot of behavioral data, right? I mean, it's as soon as you pay with a credit card or a debit card, right? I mean, all of this, but all these memberships too, right? I mean, you get a membership here, you get that, you subscribe to that. I mean, it should never end, right? Like your CBS, your whatever, what? Barnes and Noble, and so on and so on and so on. Right? So all of this generated data. Yes, sir.
Question. Remember, like, so I'm trying to get your mind, like, what concerns. When I go to the store, I buy certain products, they have my phone number because then I get a discount. Coupon for one of those products. Now, also, we are getting a barrage from requests from charities with addressing with our name. Very increase. It's some kind of anything to do with AI.
Potential. Not necessarily, right? The data, I mean, maybe if there's somebody out there and says, I'm gonna use an algorithm to predict the likeliness of you responding, to a request like that. So let's just double down, right? And send her another 5 requests this year, right? But I assume this has been going on for a long time, right? I mean, they have enough information about you, right? To know your age, to know your senior citizen, they know that, I don't know, they assume you have a ton of money and, so, yeah, they're just gonna try it, right? I honestly, on I mean, you get that too probably, right? Oh, your house, you know, you have, every week, you know, you have $5 million in your house. And what don't you want to refinance, right? No, I do not, right? And I think of myself as somebody who's very careful with, you know, disseminating phone number, email, or, I mean, when they ask you places like, oh, you know, would you like to sign up for it? Like, no, I do not, right? If you 10% the next time, no, thank you, right? But a lot of that information is public anyway. Like, I'm still shocked that anybody can look up, how much I bought my house for. Right?
Yeah.
It's private, and it should be private. Why does it have to be public?
It's a title.
There's just so much information out there about us.
Thank you for your time today.
Well, thanks for having me again, and, what is it, Super Bowl?